Hello there.
What a political move to stick two fingers up at Suella Braverman.
Politics at Jack and Sam's is the podcast where we tell you what's going to happen next week in the wild world of Westminster.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico, and with me, as always, is the great Sam Coates of Sky News.
Keeping you ahead of the political agenda. One top civil servant said to me they're 70-30 in favour of thinking something will happen as soon as Monday.
Sam, is it going to happen, yes or no?
Listen to Politics at Jack and Sam's wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're just tuning in, well, where on earth have you been?
There you go. Rishi Sunak, we are expecting to be in front of that letter.
And Sophie, notice, it does not have a prime ministerial crest on. So that is absolute proof he is calling a general election. There's no prime
Westminster had been on tenterhooks all day, the rumour mill cranked up to 11. As the heavens opened, cameras and reporters gathered in Downing Street in anticipation of a summer election. Then, shortly after 5, as the rain fell even heavier, the announcement came. An increasingly soggy Rishi Sunak at the lectern, not drowning but waving the prospect of a brighter future in front of the body politic, if, that is, you vote Conservative.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future. To decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I'm Neil Paterson, and on this edition of the Sky News Daily, we are back in Westminster to unpick exactly why the PM just chose July for the general election. In the studio with me, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Hi, Sam.
Hello there.
And as a Brucey bonus, we have our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, joining us as well. Such is the gravity of the situation.
Hi, Neil.
First things first, did we see this coming? Because I didn't, as evidenced by the fact that I am technically currently on holiday.
As the host of a predictions podcast that didn't see this coming, Neil. Do you know, it was so bad that there was an election meeting about campaign finance called in Conservative headquarters last week, and one political journalist tweeted, well, this might be seen as a sign that an election campaign is imminent, but we don't think so. And then we laughed it off. Because I think over the last few weeks and months, the truth is we've become so inured to election timing, debate, discussion and rumour that clearly we'd begun discounting too much of the signals.
And look, obviously, there's a huge amount for us to chat about the litany of reasons that we didn't all see this coming. But Tamara, let's just talk about the optics of that announcement. This is, of course, a podcast, audio only, but presumably by now people will have seen the Prime Minister in his wetsuit, for that what it was, saying that Labour doesn't have a plan when he didn't have an umbrella to hand. I mean, it looked pretty bad.
It looked like it was done on the hoof, and I was over in Parliament this afternoon as the speculation was ramping up, and Tory MPs, even senior ones, even ones who talk to Rishi Sunak regularly, had no idea this was coming, and a lot of them were quite shocked and a lot of them were quite angry that they don't feel it is the right course. It didn't stop them from doing it out in the rain with some protesters outside Downing Street playing the new Labour anthem, Things Can Only Get Better, so loudly that it was sort of cutting through what the Prime Minister was saying. And I just don't think any Conservatives would have wanted those optics.
One of the more cutting remarks I saw about Rishi Sunak's statement to the nation came from, nominally one of his colleagues, Baroness Varsi, saying just simply drowned and out over a picture of it. What did you make?
Look, Neil, we're 1 hour in. And we do not know the narrative of this election. We may think we know the result. The polls may point to a certain conclusion. But in 5 weeks' time, will we remember that moment as a plucky underdog fighting through the rain to do the right thing for Britain, while a slick but ultimately vacuous challenger tried to convince us that his set of plans, which ended up looking quite hollow with polished presentation and lots of people cheering, should get him over the line? Is that what we're going to be looking back on in 5 weeks' time? Or are we going to be looking at a Prime Minister for whom he could just never cut a break, couldn't get anything right, and even the heavens and the protesters were against him at that moment where he needed things to go his way? I cannot say, because there will be a story of this election campaign And 1 hour in, we don't know what it is.
Yeah, but recently, the gap in the polls has solidified around 20%. On the basis of that alone, what the hell is Rishi Sunak up to?
Rishi Sunak has one advantage in the political system as Prime Minister. He has the advantage of timing. And he had to make a call on whether or not the particular glimpses of economic optimism, so that is today's inflation figures that allow the government to say inflation is back to normal. I think that another issue for the Prime Minister is that it is quite conceivable that he gets a flight or two off to Rwanda. But what happens if those number of people crossing the channel doesn't go down? If the proof of concept of the Rwanda plan turns out not to be right, can he afford to risk for that to crystallise? I think a third motivation for timing for the Prime Minister will be just looking back at the last 1.5 years and his relationship with his party. There's no doubt he inherited a completely broken, fractured, fratricidal bunch of MPs. They have not cut him any slack. There have been plots, there have been resignations, there have been campaigns against him. What's to say that doesn't get away and actually that doesn't increase? I think all of those things will have gone into the decision to make the both positive and negative reasons to go for it today.
What's so surprising about this is if the calculation is things can only get worse. At the moment, we've achieved one thing, we've achieved our inflation target. Other things look in train, obviously not what they promised on NHS waiting lists, and they haven't stopped the boats, but he can say he's made strides towards trying to do that, and he reflected that in his speech. I haven't got everything right, but you can trust me that on the fundamentals of the economy, I am going to do what I've promised. But I think the message I was getting loud and clear from Conservatives who did not see this coming in any way, what they can't see is how it doesn't look like he is trying to cut and run. Everyone can see the opinion polls, how it doesn't look like he feels that he's given up. And that's what I've heard so much from MPs and ministers this afternoon. It looks like he's given up. And he's left us with an election which, will be difficult to fight. There's a lot of seats where you haven't even had candidates selected. And it's going to be difficult to fight that campaign. And they didn't see it coming because he seems like a cautious person. And this is quite a high risk decision that something won't turn up to make things better. This is as good as it's going to get.
People are popping in letters of no confidence in Rishi Sunak to Graham Brady in the 1922 committee.
A lot of us had thought after the grim local elections in which the Tories did really badly, there was some people talking about, is it going to be a July election? And it felt like maybe a party management tactic, maybe to stop them trying to depose him by floating this idea of an election, when most of the activists said, after the dreadful local elections we've just had, we can't possibly go straight into a general election. But that seems to be exactly what they've done.
Sam, what did we learn about the tactics for the election from what he has said specifically today?
I felt that Rishi Sunak is going to run a fear campaign. At its heart, his address was a sort of frightening one. It was that the world is uncertain. Domestically, things are uncertain. There are enormous challenges, epoch-making challenges with Russia and China and President Putin and the Middle East, and huge decisions for the future about the economy just as we turn a bit of a corner. And you cannot trust the other guy to make them because you don't know what he stands for. And yet from Keir Starmer, what we heard is a sort of counterintuitive message, which is we want change, but he was presenting himself as the safety candidate as well. So change, but perhaps not too much. He is promising not to allow chaos. Rishi Sunak is saying the other man represents chaos. Rishi Sunak needs to, I think, change the mindset of the British people in order to have a fighting chance. He needs to convince them that the world is a lot scarier place than he has. Keir Starmer, I think, needs to run the safest possible campaign he can to convince people that he's not somebody that's going to take this country off in a direction that a majority don't want, and therefore he is a safe harbour. Elections, as ever, are the test of two different narratives and whose narrative can prevail.
And a lot more on that in just a second. But before we take a breather, Tamara, just in terms of the practicalities of what is about to happen over the next few days, does Parliament immediately go into recess? Key question as well, what on earth is going to happen to the legislation that needs to get through the House for those victims of the infected blood scandal that we have been talking about all week?
The key dates are the 24th of May, this Friday, Parliament is prorogued, and Next Thursday, the 30th, there's dissolution.
When you say prorogued, Parliament rises and it won't be doing any more business.
And then dissolution, that will be the day that the MPs are sent back to their constituencies.
There's an awful lot of legislation to get through the House in 48 hours.
Getting through the remaining legislation is called wash up, and there isn't very much time. And they're going to have to prioritise. Now, among the things which you'd think would be priorities are the Victims Bill, which is going through at the moment. And one bit of that is setting up the infected blood compensation scheme. And that will obviously have cross-party support. So it's something they could rush through quickly. Then there's Rishi Sunak's own pet project, so the smoking ban, which he talked about in his Downing Street speech. They've only done, I think, the second reading of that. So that's the tobacco and vapes bill. A lot of Conservatives don't like quite a lot of the stuff in there. Are they going to try and rush that through, or just hope that the next government takes it up? I assume that all the contentious legislation, like what they're trying to do with landlords, for example, that's all gone. That's for the next government to sort out. So there'll be a lot of MPs pursuing things which will be left hanging. And that's one of the things that they are concerned about.
Guys, let's have a breather there. When we come back, we will look at Sir Keir Starmer, Labour, and the challenges that they face as we head into, well, the general election. Welcome back to The Daily. Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, is here alongside our deputy political editor, Sam Coates. And Sam, Sir Keir Starmer's address to the nation did stand in marked contrast to that of the Prime Minister. His tie wasn't quite straight, but he at least had his suit jacket on. It wasn't soaked through. He had his glasses on and was stood in front of a lectern emblazoned with that one-word change. What did we learn from Sir Keir?
Look, the story that he wants to land with the British public is that it's been utter chaos over the last few years and that your life hasn't got better over the last 14 years of Conservative rule, and therefore it's time for a change. And I think, broadly speaking, the hope for Labour is that that is a powerful enough message that the public simply agree with them, and the cost of living crisis and the evident political turmoil is still fresh enough in people's minds. The question is, do people think that it's safe to vote for him? Because I think that remains the challenge for the Labour Party.
You want to vote for him in huge numbers. If he is to get a majority, we're talking the biggest swing, aren't we, in peacetime?
That's right. You can't underestimate this. We've got new boundaries at this election, and that actually makes it even harder for Keir Starmer. Now, Rishi Sunak will be out of Downing Street if the Tories lose 47 seats. So that doesn't feel impossible by any stretch. But for Labour to become the largest party, the Tories need to lose 81 seats. So that's quite a lot. And then for the Labour Party to be a government alone, so that's a majority of 2, that needs 125 Labour gains. And so the numbers are so hard for Keir Starmer.
Labour have always said that they'd need a bigger swing than was achieved in Tony Blair in 1997, which is about 10%. And actually, some pollsters think it wouldn't need to be as high as that because of the way that the Labour vote is divided around the country, and the message from the local elections, although the headline was, Rishi Sunak claimed it would be a hung parliament. Actually, if you look at where Labour got the votes in the key constituencies, but we're still looking at enormous gains. They had a catastrophic defeat under Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, and a lot of people thought it would be a 2-term project to get back to being competitive. Keir Starmer's done it a lot quicker than people expected, but it's still a huge mountain to climb.
Yeah, including by people within his own party. I mean, I suppose this is the point. Keir Starmer does have a point where, again, as he said at the lectern, I have changed this party in the 4 years since I kind of took over. But there are plenty on the left of the party who still are pretty unhappy with the direction it's taken. I'm just wondering if they can bite their tongue.
I suspect they'll very much bite their tongues for the next 6 weeks. It's what happens after the election if he doesn't have a very big majority. That's when they start to feel powerful. But no government has won after being this far behind the opinion polls for 6 months. They're not just behind in general. Rishi Sunak's popularity ratings are lower than Keir Starmer. On many of the key issues, particularly the economy, they've been behind for some time. And it was interesting watching, today, the good economic news on inflation, which you'd expect they would be shouting from the rooftops. They've called an election on the back of it. When you heard the statement to Parliament by the Treasury Minister saying these are all the reasons why things are looking up. You just had Labour MP after Labour MP saying, my constituents aren't feeling richer. That's where Labour are going to feel strong, saying people are not feeling it, and therefore it's not the achievement that you think it is.
But Lib Dems, SNP, I'm just wondering if, we now start to have to think about what role they might play in a future administration.
I remember back to 2015. It's like, this is really, really difficult. It's a really, really important question. And to some degree we do. But what happened in the 2015 election is that the questioning turned into one of the main themes of the campaign. And this idea that Ed Miliband would be in Alex Salmond's pocket and all of the questions around that. In the end, I think that the sort of media line of questioning in every single interview ended up favouring the incumbent Conservatives. And it's very fine balance. But I think, yes, we have to ask it, but probably not disproportionately.
OK, so given all of that, what then do you see as the role? Because obviously we will be covering the smaller parties as we head into this general election. Reform, SNP, Liberal Democrats, they find, every electoral cycle become properly relevant again. I'm just wondering what we should be looking for. And the Greens as well, of course. We talked about a lot in relation to the local election results, and Labour.
Look, at the moment, this feels like a campaign about the two big parties. I think with the best will in the world, when I talk to Liberal Democrats privately, they are not expecting a surge back to 2001, 2005, 2010 levels of seats. We're talking 25 to 30 was their private kind of estimates when I talked to them at Liberal Democrat conference. For the SNP, well, that's where Labour are looking to pick up a decent number of seats, and they certainly should. We do have the situation where the Scottish campaign will feel slightly different to the rest of Great Britain's campaign. Not least they have a sort of separate and unique media.
And the schools will be chucking out about, I think the day after.
The day after. So I think all of that will be in play. I think, is nationalist feeling on the rise or on the wane? Is there a disillusionment with the main parties that expresses itself through support of the others? It's a complex picture. I don't know how that narrative is going to play out.
Where the Lib Dems do matter, though, yes, they're not expecting to get the sort of numbers of seats they've had in the past, maybe 30 tops, but there are very few places where they are fighting Labour, and they are fighting the Conservatives in what they call the blue wall, sort of home counties and areas around London. And if they deprive the Conservatives of a few seats there, and I think they've learnt their lesson from their wipeout in 2015 to focus their energies where they can actually win, then they can really help Labour by depriving the Tories of a few seats. I do wonder about Reform, who promised to stand candidates across the country. They didn't do that in the local elections, and I wonder if part of the calculation in Conservative headquarters was, let's just go for it before they've got time to get themselves organised, and hope that shoots their fox, which I'm sure it will help to. But even small numbers of votes to Reform in some constituencies are going to be a problem for the Tories.
Just kind of finally, are you looking forward to this? 6 weeks, start to finish, no sleep, don't see your kids, don't see your family, don't see your friends. But underneath it all, secretly, or at least I remember, I was going, this is brilliant fun. I'm being impartial about the outcome of the election, but I'm also allowed to be absolutely subjective and say I really, really, really enjoy things like this.
We political journalists love this stuff. The idea of spending 6 weeks on an election bus, that's what we look forward to all the time. And I think, yes, there's so much to consider, and it often feels like there's never the perfect time to do it. But yes, we are going to be doing the 15-hour days to bring you every twist and turn. It's not always glamorous when you sort of get somewhere at midnight and get 3 hours sleep and a premiere in before starting it all again the next day. But yes, it's what we all live for.
Well, from the very bottom of my heart, good luck, Tamara, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
and of course, also a thanks to Sam Coates. That is your lot for this edition of The Daily. But before all the election shenanigans, we had in fact recorded another episode. It's on the Post Office inquiry at Paula Venables, who of course was in charge at the time that hundreds of sub-postmasters were wrongfully convicted. Well, she's been speaking for the first time. You can find that edition wherever you found this one, and it is well worth a listen. We will be back with much, much more tomorrow. We'll see you then.